Hi, I'm Sunny, and this is episode 6 of Such Great Heights. Thanks for checking out this podcast and episodes 1 through 5 before this. If you missed any previous episodes, please make sure you check them out on YouTube, iTunes or SoundCloud, as there's some really great conversations in there. After a couple months off, I'm back writing and filming new content. Not as regular as I would like, but life gets in the way. If you enjoy this podcast and want more regular episodes, it would be such a big help if you could invite your friends and family to like the page on Facebook. That way I can reach a wider audience. The more people watching, the bigger the guests. For episode 6, I headed to North London to meet with Alex Carson of Wooden Arms, a band who have received plays and recorded a live session for BBC Six Music, received amazing reviews from the likes of the Sunday Times, and are signed to Fierce Panda in the UK, Diversion in the US and Canada, and Butterfly Collectors in parts of Europe. Having experienced life as a buzz band, receiving praise across the music industry, Wooden Arms know what it's like trying to maintain momentum, capitalising on great press. This chat was the perfect time to get a better understanding of their background, experiences riding the wave, looking for and signing with record labels, and much more. If you enjoy any of this episode, please click the thumbs up on YouTube, click the heart on SoundCloud, or rate the podcast 5 stars on iTunes. It really does help get this podcast seen and heard by the wider community. I'm always keen to chat as well, so hit me up on social media. On Twitter, tweet at SuchGreat, and on Facebook, search Such Great. All one word. I'm all ears. Right, enough talking. Episode 6 of Such Great Heights with Alex Carson of Wooden Arms. Alex Carson, how you doing?
Very well, Sonny. How are you?
Good. I'm doing very well, thank you. It's good to see you again. So I always start this the same way. What is your earliest music memory?
I think I would have been 3 or maybe 4. My parents had bought a piano from a sort of garage sale, for like 50 quid. My mum played piano, and I remember we had this very old sort of turn-of-the-century piano in the house, and I was so little that I couldn't really get on the seat yet to sort of sit and play it. But I figured out if you go underneath the piano and you hit up, you actually make the hammers hit the keys.
Oh, okay.
Or the strings inside. So I just could figure that out. And that's possibly my earliest musical memory, is being about 3 and doing that. I started learning piano when I was 4.5.
Yeah.
Was before that, because I remember I wasn't really allowed to do it.
Really?
I remember that I remember that much. I remember kind of being told off, because also I don't think it's very good for the piano to like be underneath it, kind of like pushing keys up.
Trashing it.
They're meant to go down.
Yeah.
So I would have been about 3.5, because I learnt when I was about 4.5, going on 5.
Yeah. So what could you tell me kind of about those early days connecting with music as you were growing up? Because you did it for quite a while, didn't you?
I've done it for a very long time, yeah. I mean, so I had piano lessons very early on. My older brother, Fraser, had piano lessons when he's about 3 years older than me, so he would have been sort of circa sort of 7. 7 or maybe 8. No, about 7. And he was having piano lessons, and basically I was having piano lessons because I wanted to do whatever my older brother was doing. Yeah. That was the main sort of like relationship between us two at that point. Whatever he was doing, I just wanted to be involved in. Yeah. So he was doing piano lessons, which is about a right age. I was maybe a bit too young. I was very impetuous, and I was very short attention span. Yeah. And we had the most old school classical teacher you could get, the kind of one, you get slapped on the wrist
with a cane.
Yeah, with a ruler if they're not in the right position. You get jabbed with a pencil if you're not in the right posture. Yeah. And we were just learning kind of Buchmüller, Bach kind of exercises
Really,
from a
yeah.
very, very early age. Yeah, kind of getting a very old school way of learning.
Yeah.
And that is my very first. So it wasn't a particularly positive, actually, like memory with piano. I remember them always being on Wednesday afternoons.
Yeah.
Much like today.
Yeah.
And all to this day, and I'm now 28.
Yeah.
Wednesdays are music day.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
I planned it that way, so
it's
know.
a weird thing. Yeah, it's just having a piano lesson every Wednesday afternoon
Yeah.
since 1991 or something.
Really?
Has
Yeah,
kind of made me 92 maybe
Yeah.
has made me kind of like, Wednesday's music day. So it was very rigid, and but I learned a lot of classical music, and I was classically trained,
Yeah.
which is great looking back. It's very important, and I'm very glad I had that actually now. It certainly wasn't like a very kind of progressive way of learning.
Yeah.
And we were never really sort of like allowed to learn anything I wanted to learn. I had a really funny time when I was maybe about 7 or
Yeah.
8, and my teacher said, "What do you we can learn something you want to learn.
Yeah.
What do you want to learn?" And I wanted to learn "Walk This Way" by Aerosmith.
No way.
And she was like, "Don't know if I could do that on the piano." And I was like, "This is rubbish." And then we learnt Postman Pat instead, which I feel like is a bit of a cop off to go from like 90s hair metal Aerosmith, which is what I liked at that age.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
dad used to listen to it all the time when I was about 7 or 8, like lots of like Bon Jovi and Aerosmith.
Yeah.
So I was into like
Yeah.
big
yeah.
rock and roll stuff.
Big
like,
hair.
Yeah, big hair, big dramatic, like kind of rock. And yeah, then playing lots of Mozart and Bach wasn't quite the same thing.
Yeah.
But that was a really funny time.
Sounds good. So what about? I mean, did you follow, as many people do, into kind of high school bands, junior school bands, that kind of stuff, or as a pianist was it slightly?
It was a bit trickier, yeah.
Yeah.
Not really, and that's for a couple of reasons. Well, I mean, I did get into some bands when I was a bit older, but not really. But that's because I was home educated
Okay.
as a child,
All right.
which made it very tricky to sort of be around other musicians. So what I was, and this is possibly something we'll touch on a little later, but I my parents are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
So I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness in a sort of very sort of tight-knit kind of insular kind of thing, especially in rural Norfolk as well. So we're talking about insular within insular within insular,
Yeah.
kind of, there was maybe like 80 people in the congregation, and maybe 2 that were the same age as me, and maybe 1 that was interested.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you'd narrow it down until like you basically had like a friend.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So that was the thing that that was my way of kind of like, I had to meet like other, and one thing about Jehovah's Witnesses is that they, it's not like a hard and fast rule, but they don't really associate with other people that aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So that was that, but that was very much like an enforced kind of rule when I was a kid.
Yeah.
That you only had friends who were also witnesses. So I would basically scour Norfolk to find other Jehovah's Witnesses that were like into making music, so we could form a band.
That sounds well good.
Yeah, this is like a hilarious thing to happen. I was maybe. This would actually been with guitar as well, because I would have been maybe about 13, possibly 14.
Yeah.
And I picked up guitar from the age of 12, basically as a bit of like an antithesis to piano, because I had such formal relationship with piano, and I had to do like piano recitals, and
Yeah.
I did lots of live stuff from a very early age of playing big classical pieces, and because they always got you to do the thing where you're like 6 years old and you'd play the Mozart piece he wrote when he was 6 years old,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And so, I mean, that was great. And looking back, actually, that was a really like, that was a really formative time, because I've always been performing.
Yeah.
And this is why I find performing quite natural. And I don't really get too nervous about these things, and the whole thing's pretty natural for me. But so I started got into like punk really heavily
Yeah.
by the age of about 13. Again, also like a bit of like a teenage rebellion against a very sort of insular religion
Yeah, I
type
bet.
thing as well.
Yeah.
So I was really desperate to form like a rock kind of punk band.
Yeah.
And so we had like a metal drummer who was like 12 years old,
Yeah.
had like this ridiculous kit with like 3 bongos, double kickers,
12 cymbals.
It's 12 cymbals. Yeah, he literally, and like it was one of these things. Like he was an insanely amazing drummer.
Yeah.
Seb, his name was.
Yeah.
And he was but he only liked metal. That was the only,
Yeah.
because that's what you do when you become really good at drums.
Yeah.
You just get into metal because it's one of the only like, well, I think you either go into jazz or metal.
Yeah.
Because they're the two things where it's like, it's still really hard to play this, but it's also, you can actually form a band.
Yeah.
And then we had quite a slightly ropey singer, called, Paul, who was nicknamed Ditch because he was a bit older than us. He was 17, but
Yeah.
he was called Ditch because the first time he drove a car, he drove it straight into a ditch, that's like
It's a good
level.
nickname,
Yeah, that's
to
the
be
level of
fair.
nickname you get at that age, isn't it? And I would have been somewhere in the middle, about 14, I guess.
Yeah.
And I was playing guitar, and he was singing, and it was drums, and it was just like the worst music you've ever heard.
What kind of thing?
Like lots of Foo Fighters
Yeah.
and Red Hot Chili Peppers, and like all of the sort of like mainstream rock bands.
Yeah.
And I think we called ourselves Sheep because we thought that was like super subversive to be
Like
like,
it.
yeah, like sheep, yeah, it's like society, man. And I just look back and cringe so hard. And it was better. I think we jokingly said we'd be called Violent Erection, which was like just like, again, boys being teenagers and then realizing like we're never going to allow to play like a Jehovah's Witness like
Yeah, you
show
kind of
if we're
cutting
called
your
Violent
market a little
Erection.
bit.
Yeah, I think we pushed the envelope too far that day. So we went with Sheep, which we thought was like super subversive.
Yeah.
Which is so unbelievably lame. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my main influence. That's probably like the first band I was in.
Yeah. So, I mean, we know each other sort of from the Norwich music scene, and we both promoted and all that. So, after Sheep,
Yes.
where did it go from there? Where did
All
you,
downhill.
Yeah.
It's all immediately downhill. So I mean, I guess I would have been from about the age of 17. I did like a solo singer-songwriter thing. At this point, I think I would have just started at Great Yarmouth College.
Yeah.
A fine college. Yeah. Enroll now. And I was doing music performance.
Yeah.
And that was quite a good thing for me because I started meeting people that weren't Jehovah's Witnesses for a start, that were also into music, and I got a way more of a diverse kind of opinion of the world.
Yeah.
Which you don't really associate with Great Yarmouth in terms of diversity in Great Yarmouth. Not words that necessarily get bundled in together.
Yeah.
But for me, it definitely was. And I started doing like a solo thing under my own name, very, very, some would say too Nick Drake inspired,
Yeah.
to the point that I was blatantly ripping him
Yeah.
off. I think I'd heard Brighter Later in Pink Moon and just blew my mind, and I was suddenly like, right, well, I shall be like a folk troubadour singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
And that's that. So I did a bunch of solo stuff around that. We did 2 EPs, and there was like a modicum of sort of success that came with it. I remember getting a phone call during a Bible study on like a Thursday night, which they do around someone's house. So you're all there reading some very religious material.
Yeah.
And the phone rings. It was at my house, and the phone rings, and Mum goes out to answer it and comes in. She said, "A man called Huw is on the phone for you." And I was like, "Huw? I don't know a Huw." And it's Huw Stephens.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And I'd like my mind blew.
Not now, Huw. Bible study.
Yeah. I've got to learn about God, Huw. But yeah, then he was like, oh, in his lovely lilting Welsh tones, was like, "Hi, Alex. We heard your demo. We'd like to play on Radio 1.
Oh, great.
On like the midnight slot, of course. I'm not.
Yeah.
And if anyone's like, "And I've never heard this guy," it's fine. So and I like lost my mind. And there was this So at that point there was already this kind of weird tugging of different forces, basically.
Yeah.
And that being music being a big one, then obviously. So that happened, and then I just played a lot around Norwich and did a bit in London, and I kind of eventually got a bit. I think I got a bit bored, basically being on my own.
Yeah.
Was the main thing. And a band never really quite formed around it, and I also just sort of after university, and I think this happens to a lot of people that go to study art or in any form at university, is you come away from it just being like, never again. I'm never going to touch it. I'm never going to touch it again. It just sucks the life out of you a little bit.
And sucks the fun out of it as well, because
Totally.
it just
it stopped being like a hobby. It stopped being a thing I would do in my spare time, or like a thing that was like a passion. It suddenly became more like I knew a lot more about it and a lot more of the ins and outs. And I went into university attempting. Oh, hello, this is Khaleesi. Yeah, she may be a prominent feature of this because she does enjoy attention.
Get a third mic.
Yeah, just to pick up the purring.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went into university with the intention of being a session musician.
Yeah.
And that being what I wanted to do piano session musician. And I basically got that kind of beaten out of me at university, saying like being a session musician is incredibly hard. Being a piano session musician is actually even harder.
Okay.
Because piano is one of those instruments where like everyone can kind of think they can play it.
Yeah.
And with enough takes and like multi-tracking, you can.
And editing, like
yeah. A bit careful editing. Like it's not like violin where it's sort of like, you know, you just sometimes can't even achieve a note. The great thing about tempered instruments, I guess, is that you hit, if long the piano is good and you're kind of like hitting it. So I was like, okay. And that kind of idea got beaten out of me. So I thought, well, I'm not going to become a session musician then.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I kind of didn't make music toward that of my own from the age of, and this is, I may be about 20, 19, 20.
Yeah.
And I just finished university, I guess, around that time. Or just finishing up. I was in my last third year. And that was that point. It sounds like a really bad like advert for it, but it was that point I joined a band called Tawny Owl.
Okay.
Because I'd given up on music.
Yeah.
But I'd given up on making my own music. I
Yeah.
hadn't given up. I always wanted to be in a band.
Yeah.
I'd like always been in a band of some sort. I've always made music of some
Take
sort.
the pressure off yourself.
Exactly.
Share the load.
I just wanted to pick up a guitar. I wanted to go back to like the heady days of Sheep.
Yeah.
Hit a guitar nice and loud, and not worry too much about it. Basically, which is what I did. So I was in that band, which is I think is perhaps around the time we met.
I think so. Yeah. I can vaguely. I might not have met you around that when you were sort of performing under your own name, but I can remember seeing maybe flyers or something around that time. But I definitely remember that.
I did. That existed. Yeah. So I was in Tawny Owl and I just played guitar, and then lo and behold, I was in that for maybe about 2 or 3 years, and it was basically like a lack of not having enough creative input made me kind of want to leave.
Yeah.
So I think at that point I recharged my batteries enough to kind of be like, okay, I can be under my own steam again.
Yeah.
And that's when basically Wooden Arms kind of got formed. Very organically and very naturally. There wasn't really any like I have this vision.
Yeah.
I was completely lacking in vision. Yeah. Very short-sighted. It was solely that I had moved into a flat in Norwich where I had basically inherited a piano from a very kind neighbour. And because she would sing and play it, but then she bought this piano and never used it. And we got chatting, and then I think she basically took pity on me a little bit, and was very enamored of the idea that I could make music, but didn't have a piano, and then therefore wasn't really making very much music. And this time as well, I was working in a shockingly bad marketing company in Norwich. I'd really completely lost any sense of what I should be doing with my life.
Yeah.
Like I've no qualms about that. I was a bit like, it was nice, like not working in a bar or something, or working a shift job, or like having actual money. And then I did that for maybe about 6 months before I realized like, oh, that's awful. This is still awful.
I think you kind of need to almost get to that point though, where you kind of just get right to the point where you're not really happy, and then you reevaluate. You need a creative outlet, and
Massively.
That's when something good comes from it.
Yeah, totally. I think boredom is a really important thing.
Yeah.
I think boredom is super important to the creative process. In any discipline.
Yeah.
You should at some point be like absolutely tearing your hair out with boredom to do something, because then you will do it. That's the thing. Something good will come of it.
Do you think that's a problem in sort of the social media days and the days we're in now, where people don't really get bored because there's always a phone or an app or something to do? Do you think that's the problem?
I think that it's its own boredom in its own way. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think we're gonna be the generation where our kids are gonna see like pictures of us at parties and all like be staring at a phone in a corner. We're like,
and the gigs just
like with an iPad
watching the screen.
Yeah. That's it. I think that will be a thing.
Yeah.
For definite. Yeah, I do think there is still like, that's the funny thing. I don't think gadgets have even taken away from that level of boredom, because it's like a deep-seated boredom.
Yeah.
You know, it's like an ennui, I guess. It's like a great sense of like malaise about the whole thing, where you're just like, I guess, and especially if you don't really know what you want to do in your life. But yeah, all these distractions. Some people can be totally like completely absorbed distractions.
Yeah.
I guess. I've never particularly felt that way. I get very itchy feet very quickly. I get very sort of anxious if I'm not doing something. Not great fun to be on holiday with. Yeah. You know, it's just I always feel like I should be doing something creative and something productive. Sometimes to a fault, I think. It's not always not the healthiest of attributes. Sometimes if left unchecked. But yeah, certainly at that point in time, I was definitely bored. I'd kind of quit this band, Tawny Owl. I didn't really have any forward momentum musically. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my career or my life or anything like that. All I knew is I was the first time like ever making enough money to pay rent every month and not like freak out. Yeah. When I first moved to Norwich when I was about 20, I was like absolute penury, and I kind of dragged myself up from like literally zero money and like busking for food and and like dumpster diving. We used to call it dining cuisine à la poubelle, which made it felt a bit more like middle class and nice. But yeah, I used to have to sort of like get the sandwiches out of a bin, and then there was a time at the Birdcage in Norwich, a very lovely bar, the opposite Grosvenor's Fish, fish and chips. Before it's the current owners, the old owners used to like whatever was left in the fryer at the end just used to give to the bar.
Oh really?
Yeah, at like 5 o'clock. So I used to hang out at that bar at 5 o'clock just to eat the fish scraps.
Oh really?
Yeah, and then like just collecting glasses to make a few pounds here and there. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't like the nicest period in my life. Basically, I had sort of left home, deciding I was no longer going to be a Jehovah's Witness. Yeah. And my parents were kind of like, well, you either are a Jehovah's Witness and you live with us, or you are not one and you don't live with us. And I was like, okay, bye. So that was like a bit awkward. And so I left, and then I was in Norwich, and then kind of like started up from there. But in that period of time, like a lot of that was a catalyst for a lot of things to happen, which would eventually like form Wooden Arms. Basically.
And I mean, I remember sort of you dabbling with concert promoting and stuff like that, because I'm not sure whether you can remember this, but I did like years and years and years ago, I did like a little 2-part feature on concert promoters around Norwich, and I interviewed you as well as our good friends and wonderful peers, Annie from Wombat.
Annie
Catwoman. And Craig Hill from Tilt and Sky, both wonderful people.
Lovely. Did a show for him at the end of the year.
Oh really?
Yeah, it opened, yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's got to stay in the fam.
Yeah, they're good people. Look them up in Norwich. But I mean, when did that happen? When did the concert promoter and you happen, and sort of how did you get into it, basically?
Well, it sort of happened around I was about 17 when I was doing those solo music projects thing, and I started off. I was a residency for Jernitz Bar, being run by Craig Hill.
Okay, yeah.
He sort of basically had like the diary for that place, and he was trying to fill it with people doing various things. One of them was like every second Friday or something like that, he'd give a residency to a songwriter. So that was my slot, and I had once a month or whatever. And I used it as like, it was like a way of me playing new material and kind of bringing on special guests, doing collaborations and stuff, and that was great. But then also I book all my friends basically that I was playing with, and then I think it must have been like month 3 or 4 of doing that I basically like ran out of friends, like trying to book 3 or 4 acts a night. I was like, I've done like all like the 12 people that I like. And then I just basically started like opening up submissions basically. It's like, well, I've got a friend of a friend who's quite good, and then you just got into it that way, really. But and then what eventually happened is I got more into promoting than I did playing.
Okay, yeah.
Which I sort of seem to go back and forth with. In terms of what I really want to do, because there is a great deal of like, it's promoting a really good show is like being the ultimate party host. It's a really satisfying thing. It's totally a satisfying thing. And then also, as I'd moved out of Norwich, this is like a couple of years later, when I moved out of Norwich, promoting was like a really good way for me to make money. That I
Yeah.
realized that I could just like put on shows, and this is like 3 years after I'd started. So I've made this great big pool of acts in Norwich, and kind of would like to say at that point I maybe knew nearly everyone that was making music in Norwich. That's not that huge a statement. It's not that big a place.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of shows.
Yeah.
So it's not like too arrogant a thing to say.
Yeah.
But I tried my darndest to do it anyway, to meet everybody.
Yeah.
And it just meant I could put on more and more shows. So I did loads of stuff at the Birdcage because that sort of became my second home. Not least of all because I could eat their fish scraps.
Yeah.
But because they had a great downstairs room, and I sort of like kind of forced Lauren, the owner, to kind of like, it should become a venue. This should become a venue.
Yeah,
this is totally a great venue. That like turning her beautiful bar more and more into a venue. And still to this day, like I kind of see some of my dodgy wiring and lighting I put in, and yeah. So I started doing more and more there, and that really sort of became my spiritual home, and if a musical home, that I would do a lot of shows there at the Birdcage, and that just sort of really, I felt very in touch with a sense of community, which was great for me at that time. Not leaving quite an insular religious community and then finding music community, which like we were saying before this interview. If you know people in the music industry, you suddenly get to know, like, oh, you already know so-and-so because he's friends with so-and-so.
Yeah.
But then if you do that in Norfolk, or specifically in Norwich, it becomes even more like tight-knit. And then suddenly like, oh, okay, I can know everybody, and we're all on the same page, and we're all fighting for the same cause. So it was a really liberating and really, really just like genuinely lovely and loving time, putting on shows in Norwich around then. And building a community, a real music community.
Yeah, I feel really lucky to have experienced the Norwich music community, and I'm sure people who sort of watching or listening may have their own experiences with it. I mean, I don't know, obviously I've been out of concert promoting for quite some time, so I don't know how it's changed because of social media, whether there's still the same sense of community or what, but yeah, just going to a gig and being like, oh, that's from such and such a band, they're from whoever, and like, it was always great.
Yeah.
It was always really great.
You felt like you could rock up to a show on your own.
Yeah.
Which I've never felt like in London.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a bit of a chore doing it in London.
It's much harder thing to do in a bigger city. But in Norwich, I always felt like I could just turn up. I would run into like 3 or 4 people I kind of knew enough to have a beer with.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, like I would actually meet 3 or 4 people because of just, there was a very like inclusive and quite a loving atmosphere around it, that if you were like a music lover and that you were supporting independent music, therefore you're okay with us.
Yeah,
kid,
exactly.
Get in. It was like, which was great. And I'd not to that point in my life ever experienced that.
Yeah, definitely. So during your time as a concert promoter, was there anything that you learned that you took with you as a musician? Was there any kind of skills or knowledge or anything that you gained?
Yeah, massively. I really think the two should go hand in hand, and I think every good promoter should play shows, and should have played shows maybe, or and then every good artist should like go put on shows.
Yeah,
because
I
you
agree.
get to see it from both sides.
Definitely.
And you will treat people differently, usually better.
Yeah.
I would say usually better. And you, I think overall it's a good skill to have, because you are, like I was saying before, like promoting a really good gig is like being the host of a really great party. But
Definitely.
there's also those shows which just like dive, and you
Yeah,
like
I've had
lose
them.
£200 on or something
Yeah.
because you said you paid the headliner act like this ridiculous sum because you really believed in them, and then like 4 people came. And I've done a few of those. I've done a few stinkers.
Likewise.
Yeah. And they always come from a good place. That's the really funny thing about a lot of it, is that, if you ever lose money on a show, it means you've usually been too generous somewhere along the way.
Optimistic.
Very optimistic, very optimistic. And so it kind of teaches you some pretty hard rules about like the music industry, and also like just people management and working with other people and kind of managing expectations as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I think I've never seen in any. I'm sure it must in other art forms it's always the same, but anything creative, there's so much rejection and so much bruising, and there's just part and parcel of it. There's no artist out there. There's no creative person out there that hasn't been rejected. If they haven't been rejected, they're gonna be like a complete arse.
Yeah.
They're gonna be so awful.
Yeah.
The worst person to have at a dinner party ever.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, I breezed through life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was very important for me to kind of to take some notches out of my ego and to like understand that, you know, not every show can be like sold out, amazing fun times, best thing ever. So yeah, I totally think it was a massively important time, and I also I met so many incredible people that I still contact today. I mean, yeah, we met through that kind of scene.
Yeah.
And so many amazing people I still work with, and I still like keep in touch with and make music with or do anything with, and it's great.
So let's talk Wooden Arms. So you're signed with Diversion in the US and Canada, and Fierce Panda in the UK.
Yep. Butterfly Collectors in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland.
Very nice.
Yes, 3 indies. Yeah.
I mean, you've said before about prior to this, you said about the different lineup changes and everything. Could you maybe talk briefly about how you've got to sort of where you are with the lineup now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, like I didn't have any forward vision with the band as such. Like I wasn't looking to make a band. So the people that I was working with very early on were just sort of friends and people that were involved through no kind of massive strategic thinking, just a great deal of like, oh, you're doing a fun thing, let's do a fun thing together. So there was Lydia who was singing, and she was originally from Torneau, and she sort of followed me over when I left. And then I met like a violinist through this terrible marketing company. There's one good thing that came out of it, is I met Jess, who played violin, who was the brother of a friend I was working with there. And then I met Finn busking in Norwich. And then we sort of all formed a band, but it all happened bit by bit. That was the thing. It all happened over a course of maybe 6 to 9 months, I guess. I was writing these songs on piano. And, you know, a lot of songs like that were made it onto Tide, like Noah and False Start and stuff like that. So very old stuff now. And I was writing all them, but they were just piano and vocals. They were pure, like, solo stuff. And I wasn't really kind of thinking of anything to do with them. They were quite long and windly and sort of slightly odd songs that they weren't like pop chorus structures or anything like that. So I just really wasn't thinking about any of that, making it into songs exactly. They were just pieces to me. And then they sort of gently evolved, basically, the more people came in. So, like, when Lydia got involved, I thought, well, it'd be cool if we had, like, vocal harmonies, because she's got a great voice. And a really, like, high voice as well, and I have quite, like, a low mid-range voice. And so that was one thing, and she could play guitar, so that was, like, another little added thing we would do. And then Jess would come and do violin, and then I was like, okay, well, that's cool, but because that's now going to change how the piano part is, because then my knowledge of how to arrange music changed a lot over this period of time, because when you had a cello and a violin, I suddenly realized that if I did too much in the sort of low mid register on the piano, that would like muddy up the cello. And if I did too much in the high end of the piano, that would kind of obscure the violin and things like that. So I started like writing around them and writing for them, and then realizing that certain things can't happen on a violin but can happen on a piano and vice versa. So I really got more into arranging, and that's actually like almost a big part of what I do with Wooden Arms now. We all write together. There's a lot more writers involved, but I you know, the arrangement is still something that I've got quite like a firm grip on. And so it progressed that way, and we made an EP and put it out ourselves and made it all the covers ourselves, because I had a friend who worked at Norwich School in the art department, and so he had access to like a laser printer, and, you know, things like that, laser cutter and things like that, and various things. So he like would cut these wooden stamps, laser cut these wooden stamps, I should say, which we then like used as like potato prints.
Oh, great! Yeah.
First EPs. We did everything ourselves, and everything was just very much like an artistic endeavor, basically. There was no commercial aspect to it whatsoever. I was really aware of the fact that it was probably going to just be like a vanity project in that sense. But then we got some nice success with it, and it sort of took off a bit more. And then I got a bit more enthused by it. I think I'd kind of talked myself out, in the early days anyway, talked myself out of it being anything more than just like a Norwich thing, or just like a thing that I do on the side, because you made music before, and I had all the bruising and the rejection and everything from various other incarnations being solo, and then it not working out being another band. So I was quite, like, pessimistic's maybe too strong a word, but I didn't have high hopes. I wasn't like, all right, I don't know. I hear these interviews where people be like, I knew I was making something special from day one. I didn't feel like that at all.
Yeah. I wonder if that's true or if that's just like, right, I've got to seem confident.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it now.
I totally didn't feel like that. I totally felt like I was doing something quite weird, but I was enjoying it.
Yeah.
And it seemed like other people were enjoying it. So I just sort of carried on. And I just enjoyed being in a band again, but I liked being in a band where I was in charge, basically. I'm a bit of a Napoleon.
Yeah.
And it sort of progressed that way. And then Jeff joined, which was the real kind of, is what you kind of, if people have heard Wooden Arms, that's what they will know more now, is the kind of the era of Jeff, as I like to refer to it as. When he joined as a sort of like Dave Gilmour-esque character.
Yeah.
To sort of fill in the gaps when Lydia wouldn't play, and she sometimes couldn't make every show, and she was moving off to Manchester anyway, so Lydia was sort of like on the periphery of the band and about to leave, and then she was playing guitar and singing. So I was like, I need someone who can play guitar and sing.
Yeah.
And me and Jeff used to be on the same record label when I was in Tawny Owl, and he was in a band called The Romance of Ballooning, which is as terrible a name.
Yeah.
But they're a great band. It's a terrible name for a band. Tawny Owl was a terrible name for a band as well, in fairness. So we both knew each other from like a few years back, and hung out and knew each other, but never made music together. And I sort of loosely just started getting him involved, just because he'd moved back to Norwich from uni. He was a bit younger than me. And, just getting sort of loosely involved. I say, like, he would just fill in. He was like the way Dave Gilmour filled in for Sid Barrett, because when Sid Barrett was too like high to like play notes, he would like just come in with a guitar solo and start playing. That's what like Jeff would do. That he would like play the guitar bits. Lydia was like a bit underconfident with playing or something like that. Or like if she couldn't sing and play at the same time, he would like, oh, I'll play the guitar bit or whatever. And that was his like role. And then that is so funny that went from being like, oh, I'll be like a part-time member of the band, to being like, oh, I'll be a full-time member of the band. Like, oh, I'll come co-write some songs with you. I'll put some of my own songs into it as well.
Oh,
and so,
that's cool.
a really lovely like friendship and working relationship developed from there, which. It was so funny, and a lot of it is down to me like pressuring him. He like a lot of the time he wasn't that keen. I just to be like, no, Jeff, come do it. And the big example of that is like he never played trumpet live. Ever before Wooden Arms, and then he had this great song which he had like a little, I guess, 2-minute demo of called December. And I was like, this song is amazing. We should totally like work on it together. It like needs to be a bit longer. We need to add this. And then he was like, yeah, but I mean, I can't play the trumpet live. I'm like, you totally can play the trumpet live. And then I basically convinced him to become a multi-instrumentalist. The poor like idiot. I've just been like, and to this day, he now plays like bass, guitar. He's got like a little sampler and keyboard. And he's got the trumpet and his vocals. And he's just like, he's gone from being like the guy who would sometimes play a bit of guitar when someone else couldn't, to now like he's got like 6 instruments. I'm like, no, give him more. He can do it. And that's the thing, because he is like insanely talented. He's just like a little underconfident sometimes with it, and he's like a little fire under the butt. We need
accordion. Learn accordion.
Yeah. Like here's the French horn. Here you go. So that was a really lovely kind of time. And then Mac joined, who was our drummer. And again, he was like always on the periphery. I lived with his girlfriend for a long time, so he was always like hanging around the house. Which is again another great reason.
Roped him in and all.
Another great reason to hire people if they're just like around.
Sounds good.
Form a band. And he's a great drummer. And the great thing about Mac is that he's a musician and then he's a drummer, which is how I've always described him. That he will think about what it actually needs. The song needs, or what should really be there, before he'll think, well, this will be a really fun drum beat, or this will really like show that I'm really talented or something, or I'll just be the loudest guy here. You know? And I've seen that in a lot of drummers, and I think that's not too harsh a thing to say.
Definitely. I think that's the sign of a good drummer, when you can kind of go, I would like to do this, but what it needs is something simple.
And he's a great songwriter in his own way, as well, his own regard, and he's a great singer. So then that we just all naturally, this all would happen after Tide, I think, as songwriters. We all kind of kind of during, actually, I guess, the recording of Tide, that Mac would come up with these ideas just in the studio and do this, and they made their way into the record. Little ideas at that time, and then it's just like, well, obviously we should all be together from day one.
Yeah.
Because then the whole song would have this, rather than us trying to like kind of fit stuff in. So
Yeah,
Tide always felt a bit like they were my songs, and we were always trying to like slip stuff in to make them a bit better. Whereas Trick of the Light, this new record, is we've all gone to it from like day one together.
Yeah.
And be like, what does it need? And there's still an element of one of us will come up with the core principle of a song, and then the others will add stuff. But it's so much earlier on now that someone will be like, I've got these chords and these lyrics. This is like the rough basis of the song. Let's all work on it together. And so it's this great communal kind of growth, rather than, which that sounds really painful, communal growth, rather than me sitting on my own, kind of beavering away with like pen and paper and writing out this stuff. So it really developed that way, and it was the best. I mean, in my opinion, and I'm a bit biased, obviously, but like my opinion, the best we ever sounded was when we all worked together.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Alex Carson from Wooden Arms, and this is Such Great Heights.
Before we go on to sort of the new record, I had the pleasure of catching you guys finally. I've been meaning to see you for quite a long time. So back in, I think it was November last year at the Forge in Camden.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, personally, I didn't really know how your music would kind of translate into a live setting, since it's so anthemic and emotive and everything. But the performance was really, really special, and could hear a pin drop basically, and people sat on the floor and really sort of involved. So how do you approach your live performance when it is so emotive?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't. Do you know what? I've often thought about lots of parts of the live thing, and I think I've sometimes overthought it, and then sometimes the thing that seems to work best is the stuff that isn't overthought at all.
Yeah.
So that's the really funny thing, is I've often thought, well, maybe we need to do like a big. How do we do the big Arcade Fire show in like a small venue? Because I mean, we can't fill like a 2,000 cap venue.
Yeah.
So how do we do that in like the 200 cap venue?
Yeah.
And the answer is it's very difficult. But for me, I think we've always been a live band more than a studio band, in my opinion. A studio, a bunch of different things happen, which is great, and I really enjoy. But for me, the biggest kind of like spirit of the band comes from live. One of the things I've always struggled with live is that I think is my personality, which is a weird thing to say, but like I have quite like a light-hearted, comical kind of demeanor.
Yeah.
I don't like taking things too seriously at all.
Yeah.
Including myself, and so I've always find it quite hard. And I see bands do this all the time. They're just like, they never smile. They're completely glum. Everything's in black, and it's very backlit. Like, you know, I saw these New Puritans play, and I was blown away by like how like just stern everything was.
Yeah.
But it was perfect for the music. It does fit, and I do feel like we could do that as a band. That could happen.
Yeah.
That could totally happen. And I maybe have tried it, actually. I think we kind of have tried that in the past. It can be less ourselves. But then I end up just saying something stupid on the mic in between songs. And then I end up making a joke. But I think I don't know. I think it's like a defense mechanism in a way. And also a way of approaching the fact that a lot of the songs, you know, I write specifically, and we all kind of write, are quite personal.
Yeah. Quite
heartfelt and macabre and a bit like melancholic, and it's I mean, I write a lot about my religious upbringing, and then breaking off from that and feeling alone, and a loss of home, and a sense of sort of being lost, basically. And that's I write a lot about that, and that's quite a hard thing to sort of like, you know, dredge out of your emotions every single night. So my way of, I think, dealing with it is basically to not like have a mental breakdown halfway through the set, is to like make some fart jokes or something, or do something completely glib and ridiculous halfway through. And I try not to break that spell that the music can create. And the one way we actually try to do that, because I will end up breaking it, which is a really funny thing. It's like a giant dichotomy I've constructed myself. Yeah. Which we try to like blur songs into each other and make kind of like 15-minute kind of length, kind of 2 or 3 songs all strewn together. Yeah. So you can get lost in it, and then in between there'll be like a bit of a joke and a laugh, and we'll talk, and I'm happy with that. and then we'll do another big sort of 15-minute thing. And I guess my inspiration for that was I saw Josh T. Pearson
Okay.
years and years and years and years ago at Norwich Arts Centre, and like he probably played 4 songs, but they were each like 12 minutes long.
Yeah.
And they're these like dirges about like love and death and the pointlessness of life, which is a great underlying theme of every Wooden Arms record. By the way. And then in between it, he would just like, he was the funniest like guy. So you'd be like sobbing your heart out in these songs, and then you'd be laughing, and then you'd be sobbing and laughing. And there's something about that kind of line of emotion that I actually quite enjoy playing with. Now, I'm not going to say that I nail that line every time, because it is difficult to kind of bring people back from the melancholic stuff. And some people just want to get lost in the melancholic stuff as well. Like I've had that in reviews where people have been like, I just wish he wouldn't talk in between shows. And then other times they're like, they kind of get it and they realize that, you know, if the whole thing was just one long dirge, I don't know. I don't think it had the same impact. I kind of want it to have that cadence of like, you know, all right, well, here's a little small reprise of some silliness, and then we'll go back into like the death stuff.
I'm definitely of the latter, really. I think you need the lightheartedness, and everything is kind of a break, because I don't know. I think because the music's so emotional and you can really get lost in it. I think it has more impact when you kind of bookend it basically with, okay, just have a bit of a laugh, calm down, going back in, sort of thing. I think you kind of need that. Yeah,
like a little emotional break. I mean, but totally, there are bands that don't do that, and it completely works. And I think that is fine. I'm not like, you know, bragging on them. My opinion of that is like, my example of that is like Daughter, for instance. If you like watched a Daughter show, you'll come out just being like, oh, a bit shell shocked from like, oh, I've had all of their feelings. Yeah. And it is great, you know, and that's what they do with their show. But like, I don't think that's entirely what I want to get across in a live show. I think also there's an element of, I've always felt like if you go see a live show, you are going to be entertained. Yeah. Like regardless of what you're going to go see. And at any point, any artist has to eventually be a song and dance man, because you've paid your money, you've come to see a show, let's like be entertained. And I think that's possibly what I want to try get across, is like, I think the emotive bits will be more emotive because of the humor, and hopefully the humorous bits will be funnier because we've all just like contemplated death for like the last like 20 minutes. Maybe, and then I don't, that's maybe not for everybody as well. I realize that as well, but it's kind of, I guess that's like actually quite a big part of my own personality, is this like dual nature of kind of being horribly morbid, and I am horribly morbid all the time, and being a bit of a goth kid, really, but then also like wanting to be Steve Martin at the same time. Yeah, that's kind of like half and half of who I am. I think like half Robert Smith, half Steve Martin. Yeah. That's who I would love like to like get half and half of.
Sounds like a good mix.
Yeah, I think it's a weird mix. It's a terrible like just Ben and Jerry's ice cream name or something.
Steve Martin as a goth.
Yeah, yeah. Or Robert Smith like doing like really wacky moves or something. Doing like him cast as the jerk or something. Yeah.
So the new records.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that? And also with the labels, how did it all kind of come about, that whole process of signing with labels, looking for labels, talking to labels?
Painfully. It's the best way to say that. So after Tide, I think I came away specifically myself with a bit of arrogance from it, because like I was saying before, they're like, I never planned for anything to really sort of happen. And then there was some success. I mean, not like insane amounts or anything like that, but we got played on the radio stations that I liked. We got played by the people that I liked, and we got, people came to shows and people enjoyed it, and people were getting what I was trying to get across and what we were all trying to get across. So that was really nice to feel like as an artist you're actually doing something that people are connecting with.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I felt that during the course of that record, and that was great. So I kind of felt like that would just happen again, naturally, without any work or effort on my part, for the next record. And it doesn't work like that in the slightest. But what does happen is that, we then, through the making of After Tide, we were touring so much. We toured for about 9 months, and pretty much every month solid there was some sort of live commitment. So we got to the end of that 9-month run, and they after Tide's been out for like 9 months to nearly a year, and they say, the record label say to us, all right, so what else are you going to put out now? And I'm like, we've written one song.
Yeah.
in this whole time because we've been on tour
Yeah,
constantly. So we've written one song. Like, I didn't know that would happen and we need to do something now. And they're like,
Yeah.
no, we need to like capitalize on the momentum you've made with this record. And like, you know, you had a bit of success, but it's, you know, it's still pretty light in the grand scheme of things. So we need you to do more. It's like, okay. So we kind of started the ball moving. And we did 2 songs, I think. We did a single, which was Burial, and we recorded that now like 3 years ago. And we then like went through a mill of different producers because it wasn't working out. Until eventually we came back with David Pye, who produced Tide, and then he did like 2 mixes of it, and then the whole thing was fine.
Yeah.
So it just meant we like we wanted to put our foot somewhere else and see what other producers would do and other engineers would do. And we just figured out we'd struck lucky really the first time basically, and stick with that. And then we kind of so that took ages in itself anyway, just to do 2 songs. And bit by bit, it took a very long time. And then we spent a whole summer. This was around the summer 2015. I think we took off pretty much and said all was right. And Tide came out in 2014. So we said all of 2015 kind of got taken out to write. And then by the end of 2015, we'd written everything for Trick of the Light, and we recorded it in 10 days at Mono Valley Studios in Wales, which is a pretty amazing studio. Like done some like amazing records there that I won't even bother to name drop. If someone wants to interested, just Google it. But it's a brilliant studio, and great stuff has happened there. And we had a great time, and it was all a lovely period where this whole collaborative effort between me, Mac, and Jeff had really sort of like actually made itself real. And we'd made, a very solid record by the end of it. And that was great.
Yeah.
But then the main thing that sort of, that happened basically from that period on was that we made the record and we finished mixing, I guess, around about March or April, I guess, 2016.
Yeah.
And then we just spent like a year basically kind of talking to every record label ever. And at this point, Tide's quite like old.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of convince people who we were again. And it was very bruising. The whole thing was very, very bruising. And there were lots of people at the end of Tide who were very interested in like working with us. But by this point, and that momentum had died down, they were like, oh, well, maybe we'll see for the next record.
Yeah.
And then you either get for the thing where people just don't get back to you at all.
Yeah.
And you're just there in the wilderness waiting for stuff to happen. And there was stuff that would sometimes take off for a bit, and you'd be talking to a label and you'd get some with it, and you'd all be on the same page, and then something would happen. Some left field thing would happen, either on our side or on their side, and it wouldn't work out. So that was like just really difficult, and that was my first. That was my first experience of the record industry kind of like basically being a bit of a dick, you know, and just kind of like screwing you over, and just being like every time you think you're gonna get, you're like, oh no. Nothing will happen here. And that basically went on for about a year, and that was what I say was a very bruising time. And especially as I went from the back end of Tide, the end of that record being like, oh, it's all gonna be fine, because I didn't really work at this record, and everything just sort of slotted into place naturally. And also I think in a lot of ways my attitude toward music had changed. I suddenly started thinking like, oh, we need to do this because this is what people want, and we need to make this kind of music, and we need to play to these kind of people, and we need to have this kind of progression, and we need to get these people involved. And I knew a lot more about the industry, but with that loss of naivety became a sort of like certain like harshness and a jadedness to the music industry. And then also just being like horribly disappointed that you weren't always getting what you thought you should get. Yeah. And so I really had to manage my expectations about what I really should be getting and what I was getting.
Do you think that affected creativity in terms of the fact of, you know, you're writing for what you think people want to hear rather than...
Massively. And that was a big thing that I had to like fight through during the writing of Trick of the Light. But then also like we wanted to make, you know, if we had like a bullet point brief for what that record is going to be, we wanted to write more like pop songs rather than kind of weird, windly, long songs. Yeah. And we wanted it to be a bit more like punchier, a bit more like a band, a bit more kind of like visceral, and kind of there was like a slight edge to the whole thing. So there was that anyway, that we knew we deliberately wanted to go in a slightly different direction to what Tide had done anyway. Yeah. Yeah, there was a certain thing where I would read up about like, oh, like apparently like every like pop hit in the last 20 years had this like melodic interval or something like all this stuff that you read and you're like, oh my god, maybe we should be having that, and then all of it's rubbish. It's absolute rubbish, and all you really need to do is just write what you think is good, basically, as long as you're happy with it, because you're the one that's going to play it for the next like couple of years live. So there was a lot of conversation about that between us three boys, me, Mac, and Jeff, about songwriting, and a lot of like work with it. But it did affect creativity, and also affected creativity in the sense that you kind of felt like, well, no one actually really wants to hear this anymore now, because you get a lot of rejection from the industry. And you kind of sometimes relate the industry with real life, and the two are two separate, entirely different entities entirely. And I was like, oh, actually, no, people will want to hear this. This will be fine. And even if they don't, we should make some. In that case, we should definitely make something we're just happy with as artists.
Yeah, definitely.
And not worry so much. So ultimately, the ethos was at the end is not to worry anywhere near as much as I was, and I was worrying an awful lot about it unnecessarily, because it doesn't do you any good. So it definitely affected it for the negative, but I think it was like a bit of a crucible to kind of then be like, right, well, no, you've got to fight through that feeling and then just try to find what it is that you are actually interested in and actually drives you to make music.
And I hope sort of people listening or watching take that to heart, because I think there's too many unsigned artists who kind of go, this is what they want. But it's like, just do like, you've got to connect with it first and foremost, because at the end of the day, like, although the music industry is cyclical and you might be able to second guess kind of what's coming around the corner, if you want a long-term career, you have to do it what's like important to you. I think that's the only way that you will span the test of time, basically.
And also, like, there's so many niches. There are so many.
There's an audience for everyone.
Exactly. If you're doing something that you think you like, there will categorically be someone out there who likes it as well. And because of the internet, you've just got so many possibilities to reach out to them anyway. So it's gonna happen.
Definitely. So what can you tell us about sort of the new album and like the themes within it?
So it's a very collaborative effort between me, Mac, and Jeff, and so it's different in the sense that a lot of my songs are about this sense of losing home and losing a sense of who you are, and then trying to sort of rebuild that. And there's a great deal of that, of a loss of home, I think, is a big running theme for me, and just how pointless everything is, basically, how pointless life is. Generally. Quite a nihilistic kind of approach to it. And there's a bit of stuff in there, and then there's a bit of stuff in there about climate change, which is quite close to my heart, and that is a big underlying sort of thing about pointlessness as well, because we're all just killing everything. And then Mac and Jeff have very similar approaches. Mac was writing about, one of the songs is quite closely linked to like Hurricane Katrina, and like the effects of like great natural and national disasters, and also like the American and British way of sort of dealing with it, and how we've in England have created these sort of slightly ridiculous Arthurian legends to kind of cope with the idea that of anything going wrong in our lives, that there's some savior will come back on a white horse and sort it all out, which is actually tied up with a lot of the religious stuff I was writing about. And then the same thing, Jeff wrote this. I mean, Jeff wrote 2 songs on the record. He co-wrote a lot, but he only wrote 2 songs of his own. And one of them, 20,000 Streets in the Sky, is just about the patheticness of man, and men specifically, like as a gender rather than necessarily like a human
guilty
race. Just, and it's exquisite. And the thing is, it sounds like a love song, and we keep getting people being like, oh, I think this is a really like sweet, touching song, and it's like, well, you shouldn't.
Cool. That's great. It's
great. Like it's masquerading as a sweet love song, but really it's just about like how utterly stupid we are as men, and like how pointless we are. So there's a lot of like that, but there's a lot of kind of like dealing with that kind of feeling, which I think post Brexit, Trump during Trump world, we can all agree with. I think we can all feel a bit kind of jaded by it all. But it's not like a sad record. It's not a really somber record, but it kind of touches on these kind of elements. But then I think there is an overarching thing of not to worry quite as much about it all. And to crack on with life basically and make good for like what there is. So, but there is a certain nihilistic kind of like just a look at society and a look at ourselves as human beings in it. that's quite like a broad structure, I guess. Because the thing is of having 3 songwriters is you're never going to make, like, unless you decide to sit down and make a concept record, which we were firmly against, that you won't really, you'll always be like a sum of your whole, you know, you'll be all parts moving at the same time rather than necessarily one cohesive vision. But as I said before, I've never really had a cohesive vision for Wooden, so why start now?
Well, it sounds like, I mean, from your worries of, you know, not maybe making the most of the momentum beforehand and everything, it sounds like the concept of this album and, you know, the kind of stuff you're writing is perfect for, you know, the next year or two, or, you know, it's
thankfully the world wasn't sorted out in the in-between time of us writing this record and it
still
being
doomed.
Yeah.
So what are your plans for Wooden Arms with, I guess, sort of the rest of the year and especially next year?
So there, our dear Jeff is having a baby next month. So that has kind of slightly changed some of our plans.
Yeah.
He's not having a baby himself. He's not like a medical marvel, by the way.
That would be great PR.
No. His partner is having a baby. Yeah. So we're not actually going to tour until December. The record will come out on October 6th.
Yeah.
There's a single out September 1st. And then record out October 6th. And then we'll tour in December. We'll basically do about a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Yep.
Between Germany, Switzerland, the UK, and maybe a bit of Belgium and France.
Yeah.
That's like not entirely understood yet.
Yeah.
And then in the new year, we're going to release another single and then just try a tour a bit more. But because it's really boring, but because we're like all a bit older and we're all doing other things and like Jeff's having a baby and all these kind of things, we're actually like not gonna tour as much as we used to. I think we're going to, and just literally because we have lives, and we're gonna tour like 2 weeks at a time, and then less. We used during Tide, we like would go to the opening of a tin can. We'd go to the opening of anything. We'd like, if you booked us, we would play. But now I think we're going to do a much smaller, closer knit runs of shows and make them a bit more kind of unique and special and try to play. We're big on playing unique venues, and that's something we're looking at for next year, is playing more like theaters and churches and like abandoned warehouses and like interesting, unique spaces, and making the shows a bit more of a show rather than a gig as well, involving a lot of audio visual. Kind of try to piece the whole together with a certain level of kind of narrative, and and try to make the whole thing, as I say, a bit more of an event rather than necessarily, it's just a gig. You know, we stand underneath some colored lights and we play some songs. So we try. That's an area we want to kind of go with it, and then hopefully that will take us all the way up to the end of like next year, basically with touring and festivals and tracks off the record. And there may, it's a bit up in the air, but there may be a little bit of a break for baby-related reasons shortly after the record. And also because, we're all actually now doing individual other things. I'm working with other artists in various capacities. Someone creative and some more like behind-the-scenes roles, and so is Mac, our drummer. As are the girls of the string section. I've not mentioned Connie and Fifi. I mean, they're both very talented musicians. They session on a lot of other bands. So we're not entirely certain. I think what's going to happen, I know that there is the third Wooden Arms record written. I have it in my head, and I have a lot of it written down. And so does Mac, and I know Jeff has quite a few that we would put together. So if we were to all sit down, within a month, there would be another record. So it's no lack of material. It's more about whether or not we think it's the right time to release anything. And whether we're the kind of band who just releases a record every year or every 2 years or something like that, or whether we're the band who releases a record when we want to. And we've kind of, as we've gotten a bit older, we're now more of the latter. We used to think we were the former, and we just had to keep like doing stuff and like progressing up the ladder. And a lot of the time we come to the conclusion we're not going to be Ed Sheeran. We're not going to like sell out 3,000, 4,000 cap venue. Well, he sells like 20,000. What I'm saying. We're not going to have bit parts on Game of Thrones. Wish that we were. I mean, sure? I think we do a better job. Frankly, but never mind. That's another podcast for another time. But that's not going to happen, and I don't think any of us want that to happen either. So it's kind of accepting, managing expectations of what you want to do with your music, and I think we want to make music that interests us a lot, and that probably means that we kind of make a smaller niche group, and we kind of we push out from there. So I think that's the kind of way we want to think about it, as less of a commercial bent and less of being this has to be our career, this has to be our money.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing. Like I think we all thought about early on when it first started getting success, is that people were like, okay, we need to start thinking about quitting your jobs.
Yeah.
You need to start thinking about what you're going to do for money, what you can do for that, and how you're going to plan this. And then that's like a lot of pressure. That changes your entire attitude toward art in general.
Yeah, definitely.
And all three of us work like pretty much solely in the music industry in various incarnations and all in quite creative roles. But like to say you can only make money out of your own music, it's actually really difficult.
Yeah.
And a lot of pressure on your own music and yourself as a person. And it's just actually really unhealthy in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't like the sound of that.
It's quite like a lofty ideal built up from like the 1970s. I think of like you'd get a big record advance and you'd buy a house and all will be fine.
Those days are gone.
Those days are gone. Yeah. And I'm not saying you just have to go work in like Starbucks or something like that and sludge through. I mean, you can totally do that as well. But I write music for other people. I write music for TV and film now.
Yeah.
I do tour managing and do front of house. I do a bit of gig promoting, and all these things are like they all add up.
Yeah,
they all add up to like I think a better overall understanding of music in general, and like a better approach to the whole thing. So I don't feel there's as much pressure now for me to like I have to go and write like a pop hit to go make some money, like, and Wooden Arms has to have that stamp on it. Wooden Arms can be like the weird thing I want it to be.
Yeah,
which is what it is.
Yeah.
So that's great.
So finally, I mean, through all your experiences over everything you've kind of talked about, what advice would you give kind of upcoming musicians, especially like unsigned musicians who maybe just basically want to succeed in music? What would you say to them?
My biggest bit of advice, and I've said this before. How much are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yeah,
that's fine.
You have already, actually.
Oh yeah, I have. I know, and I've kept off the F-bomb.
Yeah.
Is don't be a dick. That's literally my number one rule. Is just don't be a dick, because there are so many times you'll do one nice thing for somebody, and then 4 years later they'll be like, oh, I remember you like totally helped me out with some like you like let me borrow your amp for that whole tour. You let me like you let us stay over, and then it will all come back round.
Definitely.
If you all put that kind of energy back in, and it sounds Californian to talk about energy, but like if you put positive energy basically into like that sort of thing, it will come back. And then I guess a precursor to that is be part of the community, be part of the music community.
100%.
You and I have talked about this like personally, just as pals.
Yeah.
To say like, growing up in Norfolk and Norwich, hello, you're giving me a wash now. in Norwich, in quite like a supportive, small, tight-knit kind of music community, meant that you kind of felt like you were part of something.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
you could engage with it, and people would give back to it, and the whole thing then just sort of came together. And that was a super important thing for me, I think, is to be part of a community. And no one will like invite you. You just have to go and turn up to shows.
Yeah.
And like go to shows where you're not playing and don't have any involvement in. Just go out and support music, because you want people to come do that to your show.
Definitely.
And, listen to other people's music, kind of don't be too proud to not take advice from people as well. That's the other thing, is people get this idea that they just need to make it on their own, because they've heard in some interview someone said, I made it on my own.
Yeah.
I've never made it on my own. I had tons of help across the board. From everything from like Arts Council funding to like friends letting me sleep on couches and things like that. The whole thing is a joint effort from the get-go. So definitely like being part of the community and being with everyone is the right way around to do it. I think it's no man is an island.
Definitely. And I think as well, if you're listening or watching this and you're saying there is no community, there is no space or anything, it's up to you. I think people want things on a plate. Yeah. And people are too, and I get it, people are scared to kind of put themselves out there, put the money on the line and everything. We've done that. Yeah. We've lost money at times. We've earned money as well.
But it's like it's not the end of the world as well.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
Like even like the lessons you learn, even when it goes tits up, and you, which it has happened many times. You learn a lot from it, and then when it does go right and you sell out like a venue, you learn from that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it. You got to take the rough with the smooth.
Definitely.
And I think Yeah, I think going out and making your own community is a very good bit of advice.
Yeah.
And like a community is like more than one person,
Yeah.
basically. As long as you and like one other person are having
Yeah.
a good time, and you're like both engaged with it, then it's fine.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for
Thank you.
talking, and yeah, see you soon.
Cheers.
A huge thanks to Alex for having me over for the chat. Lost in Your Own Home is out now, and I really hope you check it out. You can find it by visiting woodenarms.co.uk or give them a like on Facebook /Wooden Arms Band. It's so encouraging seeing old friends, talented friends, make it in the music industry. We all know how difficult it is to progress, survive, and succeed in the music industry. But when it does happen and talented people get the success that they deserve, it's really wonderful. If you enjoyed any of this, please do give it a like on whichever platform you're using, so I know that you've had a blast. Around the time of the release of this episode, I'll be touring Europe with Pray Drive, whose song I used for the theme of Such Great Heights. We'll be in Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany, so if you're in any of these places, it'd be great to see you. Go to facebook.com/Pray Drive Band for all the details. I'll be sharing video content on the road as and when I can, most probably on Twitter and Instagram, so follow my personal account for that, @SunnyNorwich on both Twitter and Instagram. Tons more stuff coming up, so don't be a stranger. Let me know what you want to know about or what you'd like to see. This content is for you after all, so make it your own. Hit me up. I won't keep you any longer. Tell a friend, be good to one another, and I'll see you again for another episode of Such Great Heights. Ta-ra.